Hello and welcome to episode 84 of Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. With all that's gone on in the last 5 months, we went back and forth trying to pick our next movie. While we were hoping to continue watching movies made by women or people of color, we ultimately decided that there was an important conversation to be had about American History X, the 1998 film from director Tony Kaye and writer David McKenna. Most people remember the brutally violent scenes from the movie, but prompted by some reading we've done, we wanted to focus on the quieter scenes, the ones where the white supremacists speak their minds, to see how the movie feels in 2020. Be aware, this episode will contain difficult and objectionable content as we discuss the movie's violence, including racist hate crimes and rape. We will also be discussing the racist views of white supremacists, including clips that include racist ideas and slurs. So please, take care while listening.
American History X seems to have more of a following now than it did upon its release. The battle over the release of the film was common knowledge, including Edward Norton allegedly influencing a re-edit in order to give his character more screen time, and director Tony Kaye asking for his name to be removed from the credits. And the embattled film only made a little more than its $20 million budget worldwide. Norton's fiddling worked, though, as his performance garnered the film's only Oscar nomination. As is often the case, though, the movie became more popular on video in the years following its release and was a staple of many a college dorm room video collection.
But is the story of Derek's redemption from racism really one we should be championing?
Or should its surprisingly glossy take on white supremacy be reevaluated? Keep listening.
I should expel you.
Go ahead. What, you don't think I could handle it?
No, I think the street would kill you. Your rhetoric and your propaganda aren't going to save you out there. So here's the drill. I'm your history teacher from now on. We will discuss current events. We will call this class American History X. We meet once a day. All right, your first assignment is to prepare for me a new paper due tomorrow.
Oh, come on, Sweeney. It took me a week to read Mein Kampf. That isn't fair.
That was Avery Brooks as Dr. Sweeney, the principal at Danny's school, played by Edward Furlong, saying the title of the movie, which is also the title of a special class that the principal is going to be teaching one-on-one with Danny. Apparently without approval from anybody else in the administration.
Would that even be... I mean, you're a teacher. Is this just...
There'd have to be some channels. Some
flagrantly against protocol here?
Some people would have to be okaying this. But that's something that we'll talk... I think we should talk about. The character of Sweeney seems to have some pretty otherworldly powers as a principal.
Right. He runs that school the way he wants to run it, right?
He gets Derek's parole. He gets to go in and see Derek in the prison.
He gets to
medical ward,
consult the police department, right?
Right. He's a consult for the police department. He's a powerful man.
Yeah. Well, it seems like a integral part of that community.
That's a good way to look at it. Not as somebody who wrote a screenplay with very little idea of what a principal actually can and can't do. It reminds me of when I was in third grade, and they would be like, write about what you would do if you were principal. And I'd be like, I'd make it snow pizza. And the principal can't do that. It's not God.
Well, did you see American History X?
I'm a third grader who's seen American History X.
So I guess the big question is, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Maybe we should, first of all, aside here,
yeah.
We were on hiatus for a very long time, by the way.
Yes.
Our last episode was what, March? Or April?
April. Maybe May.
Yeah. So first of all, it feels great to be back.
Yeah, it does.
But I think it might be a little rusty here going into it. But I think I'm happy to be back. We're in a new sort of socially distanced studio that I set up in the garage.
Right.
Because we did the remote thing in the quarantine episode, and it was fine. It worked. But I think we realized that we need the physical proximity to one another to really get the Can We Still Be Friends fire going.
Right, yeah. So we're recording from a garage. We've upgraded to Mark Maron WTF status.
Right, yeah.
out of the house and into the garage.
Yeah, but it is hot in here.
It is.
I don't think
It's
our garage
it's a
is
hot
as nice
day.
as- Yeah.
It was a,
So we've got fans on us.
Yeah.
And so if you hear sort of a low-level hum, I don't know if I'll be able to get that out in the editing process or not, but that's what that is.
Yeah.
And so hopefully
It's
it's
us
not too
staying
distracting.
cool.
But it's keeping us alive, I
it
would
is.
say.
Yeah,
And-
we'd probably pass out.
yeah, and keeping the air circulating more
Right.
safely. So
Right.
just wanted to get that out of the way. Welcome back, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for popping in again. Thank you for not leaving us.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
And we really do hope that everyone is staying safe. These are some, as we said in our last
Yeah.
episode, some uncertain times.
uncertain times still, even today.
I thought we would be more certain by now,
Right.
but we're not.
I think-
And that's why we had to come up with Plan B in the garage.
Yeah. Well, I guess Plan C. Plan B was the remote.
Yeah,
We're on to
right,
Plan
right, yeah.
C. We'll hopefully get to Plan X at some point in the
Yes.
episode.
Well, that's going to be the one-on-one with the principal. Can't we still be friends X?
right.
So
That'll be different.
So, anyways, going back to the movie, though, let's jump right into the movie. Why are we doing this? Because I think in our intro we said and we talked about on social media that we hadn't really announced it, but we had planned this whole entire year. We wanted to really focus on movies made by women, people of color, and we sort of jettisoned it for this particular episode. And I think some listeners might think, well, why American History X? No one's
Yeah.
really talking about this movie right now.
Yeah. It's not an anniversary year or anything. That was 2 years ago. It was the 20th, so it's 22 years old.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, with all the increased conversation about racism and racial identity and what does it mean for white people, and I think part of us didn't really feel comfortable as two white men in some way dissecting a black filmmaker's view on racism. And
Right.
there's definitely a place for that conversation, and
We've
there's a
done
way
it.
to do that, and we have done it
with Do the Right Thing and Boys in the Hood. But yeah, I think you're right. I think what we were struggling with in our private conversations was more, what is our place in this whole thing?
Yeah.
As two white men, what do we have to say?
Yeah.
And is it even
Should we
anything-
even be saying
is
it?
Right? Is there really anything of value we have to add to this? And where I think I was coming from when I sort of pitched this idea to you was, this is a movie about race, and this was probably for me kind of the movie about race that impacted me the most when I watched it. We'll get to first viewings.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of a lot of people, maybe of our age, who watched this maybe when they were in college. And I would say, just because it's what I know, I'm talking mostly about other white people.
Yes.
That this was a lot of other white people's
White
movie.
men. Do you know
Yeah, that's true.
of white women's views on this?
I mean, my
or have
wife
you-
has seen it and she liked it, but
Okay.
I don't think it's the same kind of resonance that I
Doesn't
had
seem
with
like
this movie.
it. That's just an anecdotal thing. But
Yes.
as I was thinking about it, I don't recall. I can picture white men saying, "Oh, I love that movie. That's my favorite movie," or "What a great movie." I don't picture, when I remember it, I don't picture white women in my life having said that.
Right. And so the way I feel is that, this is a time where a lot of us are reevaluating our thoughts on racism, even what racism is, what it means to us, what it means to be white. And part of that, I think, is reevaluating the media that you've consumed and that has formed those ideas. And I've seen, and we've even kind of shared our thoughts on the movies that are kind of easy to tear down, like Green Book, Crash, Driving Miss Daisy, these movies that take a very sort of like typical Hollywood white view on racism. Yeah. And my feeling was this was a movie that was a white view sort of on racism. Mm-hmm. I mean, the writer, David McKenna, is white. Tony Kaye is, I believe, white and Jewish, I believe. And Edward Norton had a big hand in the making of this movie. So again, this is sort of a white movie about racism, but it's different. And what does that mean? And where does it succeed and where does it fail? If those are even the right terms to use towards this movie.
And where it succeeded and failed in 1998 is not necessarily going to succeed and fail today.
Right.
I think what makes this a little bit different, not that we're not trying to like justify ourselves. I think we feel secure in this decision, but like it's a white perspective on the white side of racism mostly. It's not really examining the effects of that racism on people of color. I would say to its detriment. We can get to that more later, but it also is, from the sort of quote unquote white side of things, what is a white person's responsibility in the racist ideas that come up and the racist trends among white people. And like you said, I think one thing that I'm doing, and I think you've been doing it too, is kind of thinking, where are my ideas about race coming from? Why? Because they haven't come to me fully formed, like this was a movie for me, for you, for a lot of white men. The fact that it resonated with people means that something about its view on race and racism clicked for them or found a place in their head. So what does that mean?
Yeah, and so I think that that's sort of where we're coming from with the choice in this movie. Like, if we're going to do a movie on race, why this movie?
Right.
And maybe you would agree or disagree, but I feel like this was a very formative movie for a lot of people, but very few people have watched it recently.
I agree.
And maybe why is that? And also, therefore, I think even people's memory of it might not be accurate. And also, does that mean that it's really a movie about race that was for its time?
Right.
What does it really have to say for us right now
Right.
in 2020?
Well, I think that's a good entry point into first viewings.
Yeah,
because,
let's do that.
So why don't you start? What was the first time you saw it, and what resonated with you? What are your memories of it?
Yeah, so this actually is, for me, a very important film, and not necessarily just because of whatever it formed in my mind about race. This was a movie that I did not see in the theater, but I did see very close to when it was released. I remember my mom, who we've always had a close relationship about film, me and my mom have, and she rented this movie and watched it alone. And she was deeply impacted by it. And I remember she told me, I was in high school at the time. I was probably like a junior or senior in high school. I think junior in high school. And she told me, I would really like it if you watch this movie. And I don't really want to watch it with you, but I think you need to watch it. And so she gave me the tape, and I watched it by myself in my bedroom. And yeah, I was really affected by it too. I think it is a movie that, and I think part of it is just the sheer violence of it. It's very hard not to have a visceral reaction to this movie. And the way that this movie addresses racism, and I know this is really what we're going to get into a lot of, so I'm not going to go too deep here, but that did resonate with me a lot at the time. And I understood, I thought, at least, what the movie was saying about race. But I remember when I talked to my mom the next day, her takeaway, of course, she also was impacted by a lot of the racial discussion in it and its take on racism. But her big thing for me was she wanted me to watch it because I'm the oldest of four. And she wanted me to watch it as a way of saying, I want you to be aware of the impact you have on your brothers and sisters.
Interesting. That's heavy.
More than anything, that has really stuck with me, even over the years. I'm the oldest brother for three of my siblings, and what sort of example or what sort of message am I encouraging? And I was kind of nervous about rewatching it because it was such an important movie for me. It's always hard to tear that down.
Sure.
You don't want to see where it might have been weaker than you thought it was.
Yeah.
But I felt like it was an important thing to do. And I was kind of like, I need to do this because I need to acknowledge that this was a formative movie for me in my understanding of race. And I need to understand maybe if there is weakness in it, how do I make sure that I'm noticing that in the new media that I'm taking in.
Yeah.
Letterboxd rating, I couldn't remember what I rated it, but I gave it 5 stars.
Yeah, I saw that.
So that's why it's 5 stars, though. It really has a lot to do with my personal experience.
It sounds like it.
And the way that my mom kind of framed it for me.
Yeah.
In that. So that's
a real, formative moment in your relationship with her.
Yeah, it is.
Let alone the relationship with the movie.
Yeah.
I've only seen this movie once. And
really?
Yeah. I never wanted to see it again. I felt like it was too...
It's hard.
I've only seen Requiem for a Dream once. In my mind, it occupied that same space.
Yeah.
Rewatching it certainly isn't.
as Requiem for a Dream?
Yeah.
I've only seen that movie once.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But in my head, it kind of occupied that same sort of space. Like, movie is too painful to watch twice. But a friend of mine, Jason, who has been my best friend for a long time, so I have a lot of movie memories with him for movies that I watched in high school and college. He had seen it and loved it, and I was probably in high school, probably a junior, and I remember we watched it at his parents' house, and I had that visceral reaction that definitely, it was just a movie that made me feel really gross, for being a sanitized vision of racism that we were talking about, which we'll get to more, it's not a feel-good movie.
No, and I also think maybe our listeners might be confused by what we even mean by what? Are you
sanitized.
really saying American History X is sanitized?
It definitely is gritty. It's definitely in your face. It's definitely it's brutal. But I just remember feeling so grossed out by what the white supremacist characters, grossed out by the violence, and for that reason, like is a weird word for it, but I liked it. It affected me. I was on a real Edward Norton kick, I think, at the time. I remember I watched Primal Fear around that time. I watched Fight Club a ton.
This was my first Edward Norton movie, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
It might have been my first. I'd seen Fight Club, certainly.
I actually think Death to Smoochie was my second.
Oh yeah, Death to Smoochie I had seen. Yeah. So yeah, it was. It's not like my friend and I sat around and talked about it or anything, but we definitely kind of had a unspoken that's racism is bad, that's gross sort of stuff. I don't think the immediacy of it was felt by me, but it was one that I was over the years as it would come up in conversation, oh yeah, man, that's a great movie. But it never became one of my movies, really,
Yeah.
But on Letterboxd, I had it rated. I had to look it up too. I didn't remember. I had it rated 4 stars, and I think that was largely based on my memories of the movie, not my memories of the movie, and the sort of strange camaraderie around people who would kind of have a moment of silence for American History X whenever it came up. I love that movie, man.
Yeah.
And then almost every time somebody would be like, The Curb, oh man.
That always comes up every single time.
And so that was it for me too. I just remembered that scene. I think one of our friends and listeners, Dan, said on Instagram that he remembered the Curb scene and the dad from Boy Meets World.
The two things.
And those were the two kind of traumatizing things for me too.
I would add only two other things I would add to that are the shower scene,
right.
And I would add the for whatever reason the cash register going through the window.
I actually had forgotten that scene.
And
that was one of the harder scenes for me to watch this time.
And I would like to get into that because I think beyond the brutality and the visceral reaction, I think there are filmmaking choices for why those are memorable as well. For why those stick with you. Anyways, so
yeah, on the rewatch, I don't know how to 5 stars hard to move.
Okay. Are you asking me?
I'm asking you, yeah.
Here's what I'm going to say. This is very rare for a 5 star.
Yeah.
We've talked about this.
Right.
5 stars don't really move.
Doesn't really change.
I can't change the surroundings of how I watched it.
Of course.
And those memories are still going to be incredibly impactful to me.
Yeah.
And I cannot change, for me at least, that of the movies I had seen about race, and we're talking about stuff like maybe Amistad, maybe Dangerous Minds, A Time to Kill, that for me, this was a movie that got me thinking a little bit differently about race than any of those other movies did. Amistad is a great movie in a way, but it's more of a history lesson.
Yeah.
As far as movies that thematically are challenging, wrestling with the concept of racism, I still can't shake that this was a movie that I felt doing things differently than other movies were. And I still kind of feel that to a degree.
It was, yeah.
Now, here's the thing. So, watching it now, there are still a few things that I do appreciate about this movie.
Right.
And I would like to get into those, and I would like to give them the weight they're due. There are some things in this movie that I, at this point, really despise.
Yeah.
So I'm going to split the difference, I think. And right now, I'm going to say I'm a little lost, and I'm going to put it at maybe a 3.5 as kind of a safe space.
Yeah.
Sort of I still kind of like this movie, and I kind of do. But I'm uncertain. I'm uncertain about that.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping through our conversation that through talking with you about it, I'm going to be steered one way or the other. In a good way.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of split the difference now and say 3.5 is where I'm landing.
Yeah. I'm so I clearly don't have the personal growth context of it that you have, which is undeniable. It's definitely dropping for me. I think filmmaking wise, the movie's a mess.
Yes, I didn't notice that when I was younger.
Really not well made.
No. Bordering on soap opera,
Yes.
melodrama,
Yeah.
daytime TV level.
Real bad.
Yes. Like, I kind of get what
And
Tony
that's
Kaye's talking about, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Script, performances, angle choices, editing, like, all that is a mess at some point.
But not always.
No, not always. But most of the time.
Okay, we'll get into that. Yeah.
Exactly like you said. Some things that I appreciate more about this movie, some things that I really can't really forgive. And so you were 5 and I was 4, you're 3.5. I'm 2.5 now.
Okay.
Which
is much more erring on negative.
Yeah. That's real low. I understand that. And like you said, it could go up. I don't think it would go down for me. But
and let me ask you a question. And the answer could be both. But are you erring more on a 2.5 as a movie or as the moral choices of the movie? Like, this is so either this is a movie that I think just sucks, or this is a movie that offends me.
Yeah.
And where are you kind of erring on
It would
that?
probably be 3 for a movie that sucks, 2.5, knock it down, or 3.5 for a movie that sucks, and then knock it down a full star for being problematic.
Yeah. So we're going into this pretty hard on the movie.
Yeah.
I guess where do we start?
Yeah. So I don't know if we should get the filmmaking out of the way so that we can get to the real issues ideologically with it.
Let's be honest. For this particular episode, I don't care that much to talk about the filmmaking unless it's the way it is addressing it morally.
Yeah.
You know, like we can talk about okay. So like, what are we gonna say? Like, Edward Norton either does a good or bad job in this movie.
Edward Norton does a great job.
He does a great job.
Not
every other actor does in the movie, but Edward Norton does a great job. But that's kind of in this movie both a boring and wrong take on how to discuss it, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
You know?
Well, then, let's just focus on what this movie is doing ideologically. What is this movie? And this is why we talked about it. Like, what is this movie? Its take on race, its take on white supremacy. How does that look to us now?
Okay, so one thing that I would want to talk about is that you're hearing, especially now in 2020, so much more of an emphasis on what we would call systemic racism.
Yeah.
And racism being not just about prejudice, not just about bigotry, but being about racism ingrained in these systems that are designed. And I guess as a starting point, and it's a low bar, but I will say one of the things I still appreciate about this movie, and we can talk about the handling of it, but I do appreciate that its take on racism was much more broad and much more accurate, I will say, in its portrayal of how racist ideas work than, say, something like The Help or something like Green Book or Crash or any of these movies that sort of take that sort of liberal Hollywood approach to racism. Okay. This is a movie where I think more than a lot of other movies that white people will watch about race is talking about the racist ideas that a lot of white people hold. And showing them, maybe too glamorized, I'm willing to say that, but showing them as, within the movie's world, racist ideas.
Yeah.
I have issues with what it does with those and where it takes them, but I'm sure we'll get to that. Because a lot of those other movies, like I watch Crash and you watch like in these other movies and you're kind of like, yeah, racism is bad. And, you know, man, if we could just like each other.
Yeah.
Things would be so much better if we just liked each other. This movie doesn't shy away from that ultimately at the end, to be honest.
Right.
But it at least portrays the actual racist ideas that are behind whatever bigotry and prejudice white people hold towards people of color.
So I guess I'm not fully understanding you, because I thought there's to an extent this movie kind of reinforces the idea that racism is an individual's sort of like blind hatred, because that's one of the things that you could say is a asset of the movie, that it exposes the kind of like blindness of racist ideas, that there's just a real like narrow focus on I'm gonna be racist, basically.
Yeah.
Which to me then isn't really addressing the systemic sort of broader view. So can you say more about what you see the movie doing to bring in that idea of a broader view?
I just mean that it's bringing up ideas that the other ones won't mess with.
Okay.
It's bringing up ideas about immigration. It's bringing up ideas about affirmative action. It's bringing up ideas about things like Rodney King and police brutality.
Right.
I'll put it this way. You'll see these movies where they'll have like the bigots or the people with the racist views. Even the stuff like Sidney Poitier was doing with In the Heat of the Night and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. In the Heat of the Night is much better, by the way, than Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But in both of those cases, you're just dealing with people who are prejudiced at the beginning of the movie. And those views are never really explored as to how they form them.
Yeah. They're just latent.
They're just latent. They're just there, and
they're of their time. They're
right.
of their area of the country.
And so that take on, well,
Sure.
all it takes is just getting to know a black person, and you can overcome that, is shallow in its own way.
Right.
American History X has its shallowness, and we'll get to that. But what I appreciate is that it at least explores what are the thoughts going on at a sort of like, more than most movies, I'll put it in quotes, intellectualized level.
Right.
These are the real debates that people have.
Yeah.
Of course, what I hate about the movie is that you're only getting the side of the racists
Right.
on those ideas. You're getting Elliot Gould struggling
Yeah.
to kind of come up with a response, but ultimately the movie wants to give the audience a lot of credit and say, well, you'll know this is
Right.
ridiculous.
Right.
You'll know it. You'll
Right.
just know it. And no, we live in 2020 now. Hell no, we don't just know this. We have a
Yeah.
president that spouts it.
Right.
The irony is that most of the stores that were destroyed during the riots were owned by black people.
That's stupid, though. I mean, why trash your own neighborhood?
Well, that's my point. It's an irrational act. It's like an expression of rage by people who feel neglected and turned away by the system.
Exactly. I mean, it's like we had in Watts or the riots in Chicago in '68.
That's crap. I don't buy that for a minute. Calling a riot an irrational expression of rage, that's such a cop-out. It's opportunism at its worst. It's a bunch of people grabbing any excuse they can find to go and loot a store. Nothing more. You know, the fact that these people ripped off the stores in their own communities, all that reflects is the degree to which these people have absolutely no respect for the law at all, and certainly no concept of, like, community or civic responsibility.
Wait a minute. White people commit crimes against white people, too.
Yeah, but they're not offing each other in record numbers all over America. Look at the statistics, for Christ's sakes. It's 1 in every 3 black males is in some phase of the correctional system. Is that a coincidence, or do these people have, like a racial commitment to crime?
Not only that, they're proud of it.
Well, maybe it says something about prejudice in the judicial system.
Yeah, if you want to talk about criminal statistics, you might want to take a look at the social inequalities that produce them.
Yap. You know what? That's exactly what I hate. Because what you're doing, Davina, is taking one thing and calling it something else and just, alleviating the responsibility that these people have for their own actions. It's like saying, it's not a riot, it's rage. It's not crime, it's poverty. That's just nonsense. It's bullshit. It's exactly what happened in this trial, too, because the media twisted things around so people got all focused on, these cops and whether or not they were going to get convicted and whether Rodney King's civil rights had been violated. I mean, everybody lost sight of old Rodney King himself. I mean, the guy's a multiple felon. By his own admission, he's high as a...
And in the movie, it's kind of narrow, like you're saying, to say that, well, that's the views that the white supremacists have. But I do think the movie is pushing you as an audience member to say, well, yeah, but do you half agree with this?
I agree.
And
I agree with you. I agree
right.
the point you're making.
It's flirting with you in a way of saying, if you package this
There's
the right
something
way...
majestic about this.
There is something to this, right? And then you see the violence. And that's the movie's way, I think, of counteracting that argument, and it's not good enough, I don't think.
No.
Viscerally and emotionally is the only way that we are going to talk about that being wrong.
Right.
Viscerally in the sense of here's some brutality that comes from that, and emotionally in that is the crux of his conversion. It's an emotional conversion as he sort of gets to know the character of Lamont in the laundry in prison, played by Guy Torry. And Lamont really does, at that point, just serve as the type of Sidney Poitier character in The Heat of the Night, in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. The black person that shows him that his racist views are wrong by seeing the humanity in this black person.
Right.
There's a lot in there, but I kind of just threw out there sort of what I appreciate about it, but also how it fails at the same time.
Yeah. You loaded a lot. I agree. There's a definite difference between the racism of Derek and the racism of other movies, and like movies like The Help or anything that's set in the 50s or 60s, where it's just like the shorthand is we all know racism is bad. Look at oh, look at the way that they just assume that the black people are going to be the help, or like, oh, look at these outdated ideas, versus look at real common ideas. And I think
that's a good word. These are common ideas, and they put them in the mouth of a white supremacist.
Right. And so again, like a strength and a weakness, like putting a thick, stark swastika tattoo on him gives the audience an ability to distance themselves from him, which is a negative. But at the same time, it's putting a big swastika on those ideas that you've heard people say.
Yep.
And I think one of the really...
And have not gone away, by the way.
No, my goodness. But, and again, strength and weakness. Two of the smartest, strongest decisions is to place two of the formative conversations about race or arguments about race or moments where racist ideas are shared at a dinner table. Mm-hmm. Derek is saying things that you hear, that we have all heard at dinner tables, things that we hear from the news, we hear them from politicians. They are mainstream ideas now.
These are mainstream.
These are not fringe white supremacist ideas. These are mainstream white supremacist ideas.
Right.
And to put those at the dinner table is a really smart way to kind of force us to confront it, because I think that anybody who has lived for at least 20 years has had somebody at a dinner table with them say those things. And yes, there are moments where Derek is shouting these things at like a rally sort of thing, but then there's also moments where Derek is saying them peacefully and with a smile on his face and kind of charmingly at a dinner table.
And I will say eloquently.
Yeah.
He's not a bumbling idiot.
No. I guess, again, I can't tell if this is to its detriment. I think 22 years later, it's to its detriment. I think artistically, it's really pretty brilliant that Elliot Gould's character doesn't have the greatest rebuttals.
Right.
He does have some facts, like, well, doesn't poverty have something to do with the reason that crime rates are higher?
Right.
That isn't there something more systemic about the way that African Americans live in America? So it was brilliantly realistic in that most of us who are fighting the white supremacist ideas that have been seeped into our brains throughout our lives in America, in that moment we sort of freeze because we're so flabbergasted by the audacity and the illogic and the racism of it that we want to believe that this person who we feel comfortable sitting down to dinner with surely must believe that there's a objectively morally wrong thing. And so, like, to appeal to that, or isn't there something else that we can empathize with about the lives of people who commit crimes? And this is something that was in an article that you sent me that we'll put in the show notes from the Canadian Jewish News, cjnews.com, in an article written by Michael Freeman, where it was written 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So on the 20th anniversary of American History X, he talks about the alt-right and their relationship with American History X, which, like, the movie expects us to see this as an ultimately redemptive story of a white supremacist who sees the error of his ways and was unable to stop the effects of the error of his ways in time.
Right.
But this movie could very plausibly be seen by people on the right as the tragic story of an open-minded free thinker who turns into a liberal snowflake.
Yep.
Then to have Elliot Gould accurately play the way those conversations go actually looks to people on the alt-right as Derek winning that argument.
Yep.
Because Elliot Gould doesn't have quote-unquote facts to back it up and only is appealing emotionally, which to people on the alt-right, feelings have no place in any of these arguments. If you don't have facts, made up though they may be, you're losing the argument.
Right.
That if you step away from the debate, you lost.
And that's the thing is, and if you read, which we will link, Michael Freeman actually talks about going to these Reddits at these alt-right groups that actually, they really do hold Derek in pretty high regard. And in fact, he quotes Spencer Quinn from a white nationalist blog as saying, quote, Derek's arguments in favor of a race realist perspective are sound, informed, and quite frankly, excellent, unquote. And then Michael Freeman talks about how often they see that reason is on their side.
Yeah.
they're the ones with the actual intellectual debates. And the way that liberals tend to respond is to, on college campuses, not welcome them to speak, blah, 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 and you see a little bit of that in this movie.
Yeah.
That because racism should be seen as something that is so just inherently immoral, the characters like Elliot Gould, even Beverly D'Angelo's character, the mother character, they're just caught off guard. And the sister character especially, who, I think actually is an interesting character. She's in a lot of the melodramatic scenes, which are kind of painful to watch. But as a character, she's the one who actually has the moral ground and sticks with it.
Yeah.
Both at the beginning in the dinner table and afterwards when he comes back, she still has those same views that this is wrong. And she's in the family as well.
Right.
She had the same upbringing as those two boys did.
Right.
And she was somehow able to stick with it. But the movie, for
Good
every
bad,
good thing about the movie, there's a bad thing about the movie. She is never given a voice to voice the actual counter arguments to this.
Right.
They're never given.
Yeah, that character, Davina, played by Jennifer Lean, as a character, she is not weak. She holds her own. She stands up to him. She's also a real, kind of support system once Derek goes to prison. You see that, but it's all sort of implied, and her words and views are given such a fraction of the screen time. She just every now and then just kind of gets something in there.
I hate the fact that it's cool to be black these days.
Good.
I hate this hip-hop fucking influence on white fucking suburbia.
Good.
And I hate Tabitha Soren and all her Zionist MTV fucking pigs telling us we should get along. Save the rhetorical bullshit, Hillary Rodham Clinton, because it ain't gonna fucking happen.
That's some of the best shit I've ever heard come out of your mouth.
Danny, no. I feel sorry for you, Danny. I know you don't believe any of that shit, right? You don't.
Shut up, Davina!
No, you shut the fuck up. Get out of the fucking house now, you piece of shit. Please go.
What I find troubling really about this movie is that I just think of the person who agrees with this movie from beginning to end. A lot of people in this country who don't want to consider themselves racist. They wouldn't call themselves members of the alt-right.
Right.
But they're half agreeing with what Derek's saying.
Right.
And the person who agrees with this movie from beginning to end can actually leave the movie still believing half of those arguments.
Yep.
And at the same time saying, but racism is wrong.
Right. Exactly.
I'll just go ahead and say it. They don't sound radical anymore.
No.
They sound like what our president says.
Yeah, that sound like what you hear on Fox News all the time.
I'm sorry if that offends some of our listeners. I don't think it will at this point. They know who we are.
Yeah.
But play the tapes.
Right.
You can listen to Derek's words. You can listen to Trump's words. They're not that different.
Derek says that people from other countries are laughing at us.
Yep.
He says we're losing all the time.
Yep.
Those were main talking points for the president.
And especially when he's grieving his father's death in front of the reporter.
Well, this country's becoming a haven for criminals, so what do you expect? Decent, hardworking Americans like my dad are getting rubbed out by social parasites.
Parasites?
Blacks, browns, yellow, whatever.
I don't understand. You're saying that you think maybe your father's murder was race-related?
Yeah, it's race-related. Every problem in this country is race-related, not just crime. It's like immigration, AIDS, welfare. Those are problems of the Black community, the Hispanic community, the Asian community. They're not white problems.
Derek, aren't those really issues that deal more with poverty?
No, no. They're not products of their environments either. That's crap. Minorities don't give two shits about this country. They come here to exploit it, not to embrace it.
What does this have to do?
Millions of white European Americans came here and flourished, within a generation. So what the fuck is the matter with these people? They have to go around shooting at firemen.
These are Trump's talking points.
Yeah. Just in the last couple of weeks when he rescinded a low-income housing.
Yep. And talking about you want to have your suburban dream life.
Right.
Thank you. I just took away the ability for integration, essentially.
Right.
So,
and talking about Joe Biden saying he will abolish the suburbs. I don't even think Derek would say. Derek would be like, "What?"
Derek's like, is Trump my protege? He's taking this thing way further than I ever did. No, but the main point I'm making is that the problem with this movie is that you could be someone who loves this movie,
right?
And at the end,
thinks it's so powerful about race.
Thinks it's powerful about race.
Yeah.
And then you still pulled the lever for Trump in the election. Whatever message about racism that Tony Kaye and David McKenna are trying to make has been lost on a lot of white Americans. And that is because to them, the misguidedness is a matter of the heart.
Right.
It's the hate that you have. And we know that because that's the closing line.
Yeah.
That hate is baggage.
Yeah.
Well, my conclusion is Hate is baggage. Life's too short to be pissed off all the time. It's just not worth it. Derek says it's always good to end a paper with a quote. He says someone else has already said it best, so if you can't top it, steal from them and go out strong. So I picked a guy I thought you'd like. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strength.
And by the way, a freaking Lincoln quote at the end.
Yeah, well, 98 was a different time.
A Lincoln quote about us coming together that was actually a speech he gave from the Union to the Confederacy, saying, like, this isn't us, we're more unified than we are divided. That's an aside. That really bugged me, though.
Yeah, it should.
To end out on a quote.
It should.
Compare that to, say, the quotes that Spike Lee ends out on
right.
Do the Right Thing.
Oh, come on.
The Martin Luther King, Malcolm X quotes.
Come on.
To then, like, have this one end with an Abraham Lincoln quote about unity, but the unity he's talking about is the unity of white people to other white people who are divided on race.
Hey.
Oh, my God.
Keep talking.
So, I'm going to at least be charitable, though, that they do want racism to stop. They have this, like, idea that racism
Remember that
should
in
not be
1998, Abraham Lincoln was, like, the symbol of non-racism in America.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah. I feel like I'm losing my point here, but my point,
whatever.
But my point here is that
our conversation's going to be a mess, just like the movie is.
But my ultimate point is, in this country, you have a lot of people who could very easily watch this movie, agree that racism is wrong, and still vote for Donald Trump as someone who actually says a lot of what Derek says and see no cognitive dissonance in that.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, because that means your message on racism is faulty.
It's just reinforcing the idea that racism looks like a swastika, racism looks like hatred, racism looks like violence. And it doesn't. Like, we're understanding that that's way more complex. It's deeper than that. So that's why I was actually kind of surprised to hear you say that the movie took a broad view of racism, because I felt like exactly what you're saying. And it flirts with the idea of a broader view of racism, but we only start learning about Derek's conversion and why he converted in the last, like, half hour of the movie.
Right.
Like, it's right at the end, and there is no reason given for it. He just literally... A black man makes a joke he laughs at and talks about basketball with him. And that's like, oh.
Well, not literally, because he is disillusioned. He gets raped in the shower.
Again, but that's not... So these are like these extremes that, like, he becomes disillusioned with white supremacy when he gets raped by white supremacists. Like, that's not, there's no, like, understanding that not only is this a morally wrong issue, these are factually, logically incorrect belief systems.
Right.
I mean, to me, the fact that he gets raped is sensationalism.
It is, but okay, so I will couple that, though, with another important, and it probably gets lost, I think, and I didn't remember it until I rewatched it, but there is a very important line, I think, to his conversion, where, again, Lamont, played by Guy Torry, at the beginning, before they have their little Lakers-Celtic love fest, he immediately lays out and says, "You're the N-word in here."
Yeah.
That is probably actually the beginning of the conversion experience.
Sure.
Of basically him recognizing that prison is a different environment. White is the condition that will get you killed.
Right.
Earlier on, he's, talking about all these gangs, right?
Yeah.
Gangs are the problem in this neighborhood. And he's realizing in this environment where he's the N-word, he needs a gang.
Yeah.
But then he sees the futility of the gang lifestyle, because that gang rapes him as soon as he falls out of line with that gang. And then he also realizes, as time goes on, that Lamont, being somebody who is of the majority, who has the power in that system, making an individual choice to say, do not hurt this guy who deserves it, that also is just as powerful to him as having a funny conversation in the laundry.
What's up, man? You getting out? Come on, man. What the fuck you waiting on? Get the fuck on out of here, man.
Yeah, I got this funny feeling.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
I'm thinking maybe the only reason I'm getting out of here in one piece is you.
Come on, man. Get the fuck out of here, man. You think I'm gonna put my neck on the line for some crazy-ass peck of wood?
Yeah, right. Stupid. That's what I thought. I owe you, man.
Man, you know me shit, aight?
Yes, I do.
But yeah, there are some inexcusable things in there because, again, you imagine being Derek. This is a guy who, out of whatever moral awakening came out of that, it ultimately rested on a relationship and emotions.
Yeah.
So you think about him when he gets released back in the real world. All those ideas he subscribed to, they haven't been counter-argued.
Right.
So how long is it going to be before he starts realizing, well, I still kind of believe some of that stuff.
Right.
I don't need to be a white supremacist about it, but I still kind of think that way about black people.
And really, the only thing that he says is like, that's stupid. It's bullshit.
Right.
Well, why?
I was going to talk about that. Bullshit is a word used a lot in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's a word that is always used when he doesn't have a better way to talk about it. That's actually where his arguments fall down. Elliot Gould talks to him about how, don't you think it's about poverty, or don't you think? And he's just like, no, that's bullshit.
Yeah, and this is just classic alt-right white supremacist playbook. Is they claim to have facts and be working factually until their facts run out. Then it's all hypotheticals and logical fallacies. Again, it's brilliant, but, and this is where we need to talk about the filmmaking, I think. Edward Norton is so beautifully shot, and his body is so front and center in so much of this movie. And he's shirtless, he's flexing, like...
Let me add...
How glamorous does he look when he's getting arrested?
Well, let me add to that something even more troubling, which is I'll link to this in our show notes as well. It's more of a journal article by a guy named Christopher Grau. I don't know anything about him. I just was Googling American History X stuff. But he wrote it for a journal called Midwest Studies in Philosophy, Film and Emotions. The title of the article is American History X, Cinematic Manipulation and Moral Conversion. And one of the things he talks about is he actually found quotes where Edward Norton said they used Leni Riefenstahl. I apologize if I'm getting her pronunciation wrong, but we're talking about the Nazi propaganda filmmaker.
Right.
They used her documentaries as inspiration for how to shoot those black and white scenes. Stylistically, artistically, I think that's interesting. I also think it's like, okay, but that propaganda was designed to elevate
Nazi ideas.
Ideas and to also like legitimize them and make them seem bigger than life.
Right.
Which is exactly what they do with Edward Norton.
That's what happens.
Is that a good decision? Is that a bad decision? I actually don't know, because I think that there's one case to be made on one side where it's saying we want the audience to think this guy's like a god, and then we're going to tear him down.
Yeah.
I think that that argument would have worked if they would have torn him down more appropriately.
I think that the rape scene's supposed to do that.
I don't.
But again,
so
like that's super problematic too. Like there's like gender stuff. Like the only way he's torn down is that he's emasculated.
Right.
And now he's crying, and like, okay, torn down. He's less of a man now. It takes these shortcuts that end up losing its message.
And then talk about like the black and white footage that really rubs me the wrong way. The whole basketball game. It's supposed to kind of show you this evolution of how Derek gave this feeling of empowerment to these white people. And the movie is kind of saying...
It's relishing in the victory.
And not only that, but their grievances weren't all wrong.
Right.
What were they supposed to do? They had to do something. And man, Derek did show them with that awesome slam dunk, which was the cheesiest shot, by the way.
It's a really crappy... That's where the movie's a mess. It's just like, this is terrible. Terrible basketball, terribly shot.
I have to guess maybe that was a scene that Tony Kaye had cut and Edward Norton put back in. I don't know.
That's possible. Well, and on top of all of that, aside from Sweeney and Lamont, every other black character is nameless, they are voiceless, and they're criminals.
Yep.
And they're in gangs. The movie opens with a car full of criminals, black youth with guns breaking into Derek's car.
Yeah.
Like later we get that, it might have been retaliatory for the basketball thing. But the movie opens with it looking like he is the victim of quote unquote reverse racism, as Venice Beach didn't always used to be like this, but now good hardworking white people get terrorized by black people. Yep. Like the scene where the gang members would have reasonable beef to retaliate against is a victorious scene for Derek. And it's just it's really gross how the black characters in this movie are just violent, angry, aggressive, white hating monsters.
Unless you're Sweeney or Lamont.
Sweeney, couple of PhDs, smartest guy he's ever met, most powerful man in the city.
Yep.
Lamont, funny, kind of like, hey.
Didn't
like,
actually do anything wrong.
Right. If only for the depiction of black people in this movie, I would say it's like worth 2.5 stars to me.
And, I think that if you want to talk about, hypothetically, how could this have been made in a better way? I even think there's a shot that's there that could have taken care of most of this in that Sweeney brings him books. But you don't have, like Sweeney's the guy who comes in after Derek has been injured. He's, been emasculated. He's crying. He gives him a stack of books. Why they don't, and it could have been just as cheesy as the rest of the movie. Why not?
Yeah.
Have a montage of just him reading anti-racist literature.
Yeah.
That breaks down piece by piece all of those intellectual arguments.
You want to talk about Spike Lee, the way he does it in Malcolm X.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah. That is what's missing in this movie. Can you imagine my debate on this movie would be very different?
Yeah.
If it just would have had
given voice to the
black
anti-racist authors throughout history.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure, exactly.
And
that would have been
instead what you get, the only black literature mentioned in this book or in this movie is Native Son, and all it is Corey's dad from Boy Meets World tearing down why he should be reading it, and then that never being rebutted.
Yeah. Which, by the way, as a teacher, we hear this. I hear this.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like, yeah.
But because you have an intellectualized view of racism at the beginning, it demands an intellectualized breakdown at the end. And if you don't have that, it legitimizes those first arguments and makes the anti-racist argument look extremely weak.
Yep.
And I actually am not going to be the kind of person that says that emotional conversion experiences or relational experiences aren't legitimate and aren't necessary.
They deserve way more credence than they're given.
Yes. And I will say that also because I read this book that came out, I think it was like last year or 2 years ago, that was called Rising Out of Hatred. It was by Eli Saslow, but it was about Derek Black, again, which is kind of funny. His name's Derek too.
Interesting.
But he grew up as he was Derek. He was being shepherded by his dad and by even David Duke to bring white nationalism to the masses. In fact, American History X even gets it right in saying, like, oh, I like your hair being grown out. We're kind of done with that skinhead thing. There are things this movie knows.
The recruitment techniques. Yeah, the recruitment techniques, the people they target, the idea of like, yeah, I'm glad you got rid of that skinhead thing. That's David Duke. That's Richard Spencer.
Right.
I mean, I guess Stephen Miller's still sticking with the skinhead thing, but like put a clean face on it.
Yep.
Like the head writer for Tucker Carlson.
Right. Exactly. But my point in this is that if you read that book, Rising Out of Hatred, it does exactly what American History X doesn't do. It does talk about how this guy, Derek, he ended up going to college. That was kind of like prison for Derek. Like it was his awakening, okay? Mm-hmm. But the awakening for him also started with relationships.
Yeah.
It did not start with intellectual debate. You can't have it both ways. We in this conversation can't have it both ways in thinking that like intellectualism would have saved this movie.
No.
But
it was this for the framework the movie started with.
Yes.
It set up the parameters.
So it's sort of one of those things where it's like I don't want to discount that experience he has with Lamont, as being powerful in anyone's conversion experience.
No. Of course not.
And in this story of the Derek that I'm talking about, it was a Jewish friend he made and this girl he met who was white, but was kind of like the sister character in American History X that would not let him continue to have these beliefs. And so often it is a relationship or some type of emotional thing that has to happen to get kick-started, something that gets someone on a journey towards rebutting all of that stuff and cleaning themselves of all of those
but
views,
it happens like in the last fourth of the movie rather than earlier. And then like, that stack of books, like, oh, this is actually like a real thing. Because we also don't want to ignore the fact that there is an emotional component to the original ideas. It's not like it's all rational and then they're feeling. There's anger. There's fear. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot, that like people will set the parameters that say this is an intellectual debate. Don't bring your emotions into it. But there's this very patriarchal, masculine idea that I can be rational and there is no extent to which that is detrimental. I can't be over-rational or over-logical. You can be overly emotional, though. And any emotion you show is overly emotional. And so the fact is, not every emotion is overly emotional, that emotions are actually very rational. It's like, this happens, therefore this feeling. That's logic, right? Like that follows.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this idea that emotion is irrational is stupid. And the idea that logic is not emotional is also stupid. And the idea that any emotion is overly emotional, that flip side that you can't be overly rational is so wrong, because if you're overly rational, you can justify anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's these very archaic, set in stone ideas of what the debate and what the way to engage with ideas is, that good for this movie for having that emotional side to it. But because it set up kind of logic versus emotion and didn't and doesn't show, no, this is actually a very illogical point of view.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very counterfactual point of view. It ends up where, given the rules of debate that have been set, the emotional side loses.
Yeah.
It quote unquote isn't making a point.
Yeah.
I think it could have, one, played up the logic of anti-racism and played up the emotion of
white supremacy.
Of white supremacy, yeah. Now, I haven't rewatched this to prepare for it, and I don't know if you have either, but I think that we could look at Black Klansman to think about how a movie could show the white supremacist perspective and not center whiteness or legitimize that perspective.
I think that's a good point.
Because throughout Black Klansman, David Duke and the other KKK members are given a lot of time to talk.
Mm-hmm.
But in that case, the more they talk, the more ridiculous they sound.
Yeah, that's a good point.
David Duke is certainly the object of ridicule in that movie. He's allowed to talk himself into sounding ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's because he's just this caricature of a racist. It's just that Spike Lee knew how to make those racist ideas be laid bare. And you still have emotional and logical kind of working together, with Adam Driver's character realizing as a Jewish man, while not a practicing Jewish man, but is like, you've got something to fight for too. You've got some of the deck stacked against you as far as these people are concerned.
Right.
And, you know, I guess this is kind of turning into Spike Lee, the great filmmaker or the greatest filmmaker is the question we're asking. But like, it does what we've been wanting American History X to do.
And so it does beg this question, like, what is the place of a white filmmaker trying to make a movie about race?
Yeah.
You know, how good and complete can it be? I mean, no movie can be complete.
Right. Do the Right Thing is, but that's fine.
Right. Like, Spike Lee, with the lived-in experience of racism as a black man in America, is going to make a much more profound movie about race as a member of the group that is oppressed, that is marginalized, that is constantly looked over, and is treated unfairly in this country. Is there just a certain blind spot that white people will always have that makes it extremely difficult to make a holistic movie about race?
I don't know.
That's a conversation a lot of white people don't want to go to.
No.
They don't want to think anything's off limits to them.
Yeah.
Artistically. I don't like to think that, really.
Yeah.
You know?
Which is what a lot of the conversation about white fragility is.
Yes.
It's like, it sounds like she's just telling white people to shut up. And there are problems with that. Like, is white people shutting up saying to people of color, all right, then, you fix it? Or is it white people saying, like, I've been talking about stuff I don't know about for a long time, and I need to listen for a second. And if we're just looking at, you know, Black Klansman and American History X, we say, yeah, we can see that American History X needed to shut up sometimes. Because Black Klansman saw some things that were missing. You know, not like they were a response to each other, but like, I think the criticisms we have for American History X are almost solved for, like, you know, like in Black Klansman. And was it messing with the script while the movie was being made, or re-edit to extend Edward Norton's screen time? Was it a filmmaker who wasn't the screenwriter? You know, like, there are a lot of facets to that.
And maybe it should be known, maybe it should be acknowledged for our listeners who don't know the backstory of this movie, that Tony Kaye doesn't really stand behind this movie.
Yeah,
like he doesn't.
He tried to take his name off the movie.
Yeah.
Because it was not his vision of the movie.
But with that said, it's not really clear what his vision was.
Right.
And in fact, his beef tended to be more petty about Edward Norton giving himself more screen time and it being a little bit more sentimental than he had wanted it to be.
Well, the original ending was Derek shaving his head again.
Okay, so maybe that would have made the movie more accurate for me. That changes a lot, actually. really, because then it isn't a story about redemption.
Right.
It's a story about entrenched racism and how difficult it is to get yourself out of that.
Or is it a story about how Derek was right?
Good point.
All
I don't
along.
know.
Even with him not shaving his head in the end and ending with the Lincoln quote, I still feel like the movie is 55% making the case like,
I was watching this movie thinking this is so irresponsible.
Yes.
That I almost wondered if in our episode we needed to break down the arguments and counter-argue all of them. But I didn't actually feel like that was our place. I honestly feel like our better approach in this episode is to say there is lots of literature out there.
Yeah.
If you want to know where Derek is faulty in his arguments, if you are even agreeing halfway with them, or even with the underlying emotion that comes with them, you need to seek out some literature.
Yes.
It is there.
The autobiography of Malcolm X or James Baldwin or
Du Bois, you know.
Yeah, Du Bois.
Any of these voices that were there in 98, Angela Davis, you know, these were voices that were there in 98 rebutting all of this stuff. And then even since 98, of course, there is so much, even just within the last few years, that's been written that it's so now it is so easy if you are seeking out real policy level conversation about this. Doesn't even take that much digging, you know.
No, you've got The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. You've got The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. You've got One Person, No Vote by Carol Anderson. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Hey, if you want the Cliff Notes version, just get How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi.
Sure.
You know?
Stamp from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi.
Yeah.
If you don't want the Cliff Notes version, if you want the long version. Or if you don't feel like reading, follow Carol Anderson, Ibram X. Kendi, Michelle Alexander.
Exactly. So it's there. You know, it's a shame that American History X took such a shallow way out. But that's no excuse for people buying into the bullshit of it. And I'm going to use that word bullshit in that way, you know.
It's tough because it was such a new way of looking at racism. And maybe that was why I connected with men, because it was so violent. And you could feel like a badass watching this movie.
This time watching it, though, the violence to me was like, ugh.
That grocery store scene?
Oh, my God. Yeah. Tasteless. That is such a...
It is tasteless. It really kind of relished in the torture.
It did. Especially when they're pouring milk.
Yes.
And it's slow motion, as if that's kind of a beautiful shot.
It was disgusting. I kind of feel like it clearly knew the white supremacist world. And so for that reason, it is insightful.
It does acknowledge the susceptibility of a lot of white people towards these thoughts. In the movie, it's like the loss of his father is what makes him susceptible. And then this guy swoops in and kind of indoctrinates him, right?
But at the same time, his dad...
Danny, later on, and I do think this is one of the key scenes in the movie, is where he acknowledges that the racism that was toxic in Derek did not start with white supremacy groups.
Right.
Did not start with hate groups.
Right.
That it started much earlier, and Danny comes to this realization when he thinks back on his father's discussion at the dinner table about affirmative action. Something that is still, to this day, argued on the exact same terms that it was argued then. This movie is filled with things it does right and things it does wrong. And the other thing I want to talk about before we kind of wrap this up, I do want to talk about that. I think ultimately my intimate connection with this is still there. The intimate connection of my mother saying, you need to understand the impact you have in your family as the oldest. Thematically, the powerful idea still stands of family and the impact that a family can have in what is indoctrinated, what is believed. You know, Derek Sweeney has a huge impact on him, right? It takes one conversation with his dad, because it's his dad,
right,
to tear that all down. Derek is a member of a white supremacist hate group. And Danny, who looks up to his brother, that's naturally what he sees as going into.
Sure, I can totally understand that. I think the irresponsibility of this movie, I think this movie is hit and miss with its insight, and it's, for me, it's way more miss than hit, especially because you have to really kind of connect some dots to make some of the more nuanced points land. So, I don't know. For me, I think that means it's sticking at like 2.5.
Okay.
I think it's interesting to watch, but I don't think it's valuable to watch, personally.
Yeah. So I guess we're kind of So
we're a little bit at odds.
I think so. I'm going to. I do have those problems. It's not like I'm disagreeing with you.
I know
on any of them. The question to me is, does the movie still have any value? And I think it did. For me, at least. And I think for a lot of people,
and I don't want you to think that I don't see that or that I think anything negative about it having something for you. I think that it was a vehicle for a very important developmental step for you and personally and in your relationship with your mom and your siblings.
Sure. But I will go a little beyond that because it's not like I sought out movies and books about race for a long time. And for a while, American History X was kind of my framework. And I would say as like a base level, racism is bad. And a little beyond that in the sense of like, not only is racism bad, but be careful because these ideas are seductive. At that level, it was useful for me for a while. I remember, when I would hear conversations around things like affirmative action or police brutality that smacked of American History X, there was enough of a charge in my brain to say, I don't have a good argument against that, but it doesn't sound right to me. So yeah, irresponsible in that then I didn't really for a long time care to figure out what those rejoinders are, what those rebuttals are. But I will say that it did confirm to me that racism was bad and white supremacy is bad. And, there's a reason why I texted you and said, I think this movie would be a good one to reevaluate right now. And part of it was alarm bells going off for me that Derek's speeches were seeping into the mainstream.
Yeah, I don't know about seeping. I feel like pouring.
And so is this in a way kind of a cautionary tale?
Sure.
For us today?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I wonder what would happen if somebody who isn't alt-right, who doesn't consider themselves a nationalist or a white supremacist, but feels like the things the president says ring true, feels like Fox News speaks to their point of view.
Yeah, how are they going to watch this movie?
What would they feel like if they watched this movie?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Would they feel like it was over the top? It doesn't let you do that. At least I think it wouldn't really let a person not pick a side. So it gives the movie a different sort of value than I was thinking about, potentially. And would there be an actual, forced reckoning with that mindset?
It's a good question because the movie does make that logical connection. If there's one thing the movie does do, it makes a very logical connection between this rhetoric leads to curb stomping, leads to going into grocery stores and looting, by the way, going into grocery stores and tearing them up and terrorizing minorities and immigrants who are working there. You're right. Would someone who tends to sympathize with the things that our president says watch that and say, well, I don't think that is a logical connection? I don't think the movie lets you do that, though.
I don't think so.
And part of the reason why I think it doesn't let you do that is because it films those pieces of violence in the same black and white that it does the speeches.
Well, that recontextualizes it for me in an interesting way. I don't know if it would be accomplished just by the movie or if you could make a supercut of Derek saying, they're laughing at us with the president saying they're laughing at us and Derek saying immigrants are freeloaders with Tucker Carlson saying that immigrants are freeloaders, or Derek joking about the value of Black lives with Laura Ingraham saying that Black Lives Matter is the joke. I don't know if you need the whole movie, because to me the movie ends up muddling that sort of.
Right.
Would a supercut YouTube video accomplish the same thing? I don't know, but I think. Listen, here's what I'll say. The context that you just kind of forced me to look at and the idea, I'm going to bump it up to 3 from 2.5.
Okay.
I'm not going to meet you at 3.5 or 4, wherever you plan on ending up. But I'll say 2.5 is probably a little bit too harsh. I think we can agree that the movie's real clumsy.
Yeah. So I'm going to, I don't know. I feel like I still need to just kind of split the difference on this and just keep it 3.5. Because I feel like 3 is almost too low. I cannot. I mean, we talk about 5-star movies, and
I mean that would be unprecedented. I mean, can you imagine the press going insane For a 5-star movie dropping to 3, a full 3.
Right. So, in the spirit of keeping the press at bay.
Yeah. I mean, they would love it. They would eat it up.
They would eat this up. I don't want to become a cog in the 24-hour news cycle.
The conversation would be lost.
Yes.
It would just be the 2-star drop.
Exactly.
The unprecedented.
And they wouldn't talk about the, hour-long conversation that brought us to that
Everybody
point.
would just zoom ahead.
Out of context.
Which they usually do just to get to the banter, I think. We've established.
Yeah. So let's keep it at 3.5.
We don't need that media headache.
No. I don't have any PR person powerful enough to coach me through that.
No. We've got a great team, but they don't need that on their plate.
Our typical PR is more about, you said this in the banter and it was too funny. We need to handle that.
That's what we hear. Yeah. Burst blood vessels in eyes, people laughing just that hard, people needing to pull over, they're late to work.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so how's our relationship doing here? Are we best buds? Are we? Is it complicated?
I guess it's complicated.
I think it's a little complicated. Yeah, but that's okay.
That's fine. I think it'd be probably over sanitized to end a podcast talking about race to say like best buds.
Yeah, it's complicated, but you know what, Ryan? Life's too short to just be pissed off all the time.
I think now we're best buds,
and I think we're going to appeal to our better angels here. And I guess in that way,
we're best buds.
We're best buds.
Oh, gosh.
Not being pissed off and appealing to our better angels.
That is so much more comfortable for me.
Yes. Me too.
I thought I had some things to think about.
Nope.
Turns out I don't.
Nope.
That is great.
Because we're just going to...
It's not complicated.
We're also just deciding not to be pissed off at each other anymore.
That's a great point.
So...
Because emotions are silly.
Yeah.
So, wow. I wouldn't even say I feel better.
No.
I just objectively am better.
Know better.
That was so easy.
It was.
It was complicated for a little bit there.
It was, but
now it's not.
No, because all I had to do was realize I'm just pissed off.
And stop.
Stop. Life's too short.
Oh, yeah. It's just bullshit. That feels great.
It does. I don't have anything else to say.
That's it.
You said it was bullshit, and that just shuts it down.
That's it.
That's it.
That's just bullshit, man.
All right. Well, then maybe we should talk about what we're going to discuss in the next episode. All right. So for September, I think it's going to be September.
That's our plan.
We're going to,
we're going to try to get back into this.
Right. And we're going to put our production schedule sort of in flux.
Yeah.
But we're going to shoot for September, though. And we're also going to do something we've never really done before. And that is we're going to do a movie that actually came out this year.
Yeah, like a newer movie. This, you can stream... Am I saying that right? Stream movies?
That's the word. Yes.
They call it streaming.
I thought it was buffering. You can buffer this movie.
Right.
But I realized that's actually what happens when the streaming isn't going well.
Really?
Yeah. That's what buffering is. I thought buffering was like, hey, I'm buffering this movie.
Yeah. Because I've tried streaming movies.
Right.
And it's just buffering, and I was like, is this the movie?
So you're talking about just like the little spinny circle, and I was like, man, that seems like cliche at this point. Every movie's doing this.
So many movies. All the movies that I buffer is... But that's not what it's supposed to be. You're supposed to see the movie.
You're supposed to stream the movie.
That's wild.
And if it's not working right, then it's buffering.
And then who do I call someone?
Well, that's the thing, is when it happened to me, I was looking for a tech support number somewhere, anywhere. On my TV, like I looked behind it, I didn't see a number.
Did you look in the manual?
I was like, there was a manual that came with this, right? And then I was like,
and then you're looking for it, and it's
not there.
At that point, you would buffer another movie.
Right.
Or stream. I can't even get that right.
It's not buffer, it's stream.
Okay. So we're going to stream.
We're going to stream brand new movie-ish.
Yeah, a couple months.
But for us, this is brand new.
This is breaking ground.
And
we were talking about the man himself, Spike Lee.
Yes. And that's the thing. We've only done one Spike Lee movie.
Yeah.
Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
And, hey, go back and listen to that episode. But we were like, we need to do more Spike Lee.
Yeah.
And also, with this new buffering streaming thing going on, we can do his latest movie.
Yeah.
And so the movie we're going to do is Spike Lee's The Five Bloods. I watched it once when the first week, and would like to watch it again and talk about it. And you said you've only watched part of it, right?
I've started it, yeah.
Yeah.
I will finish The Five Bloods.
This is weird to say. It just came out, but watch it with us if you have Netflix.
Yeah.
If you don't, do a free trial.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Workaround.
Like, just do it.
Create a new email address if you've already done the free trial.
Right. Is it that easy to do now, a free trial?
I have no idea.
Well, now they're going to hear this on the podcast, and we're going to hear about it.
Yeah. We don't have our finger on the pulse of the industry. The industry has the finger on our pulse.
You're talking about the buffering industry, right?
The whole movie industry.
Buffering platforms.
Television, all the big ones. And so they're going to hear this, and they're going to be like, new emails.
We didn't think of that. So I guess for now, until Netflix hears this and definitely shuts down that new email thing, use a free trial if you don't have Netflix. If you do have Netflix, it's been there all along.
Yeah.
So you don't have an excuse.
Right.
Ryan, you really don't have an excuse. So if you have any thoughts on The Five Bloods, if you have thoughts on today's episode, American History X, we want to hear them. And there's a lot of different ways for you to provide that feedback. Mm-hmm. We've got our email address. It's feedback@canwestillbefriends.net. We are on Facebook, Can We Still Be Friends Podcast, right?
That's right.
We're on Instagram, Can We Still Be Friends Pod.
Right. Just to keep it difficult for you.
Right. We have the website, of course, canwestillbefriends.net, which is where you can also dig through all of our archives. Mm-hmm. At this point, 84 episodes worth of just stuff.
Yeah, just pure gold.
Pure. Not fool's gold. This is pure gold. No.
Refined.
And rich. It'll make you rich if you listen to it.
No guarantees, but the richest man by far, Johnny Cash said, is the one with the satisfied mind.
And in that sense, pure gold.
Pure gold.
There's a gold rush going on, and we're right in the middle of it.
Right. We're a couple of 49ers. Our Levi's jeans and our hats in the river.
That's right. So, anyways, dig through all them archives and
all them
archives of gold, and there's also, we'd love to hear your voice along with your words. So call us and leave us a voicemail. The number to call is 847-306-9532. I want to thank everyone for coming back after our hiatus once again.
Appreciate it. But it's late.
It is late.
It's been nice recording.
It is late. That's the thing. That's the thing is I think we were catching up on a lot after the hiatus, and so it's very late. I think it's about time to wrap this up. And so I guess we'll catch you next time in September.
Thanks for
listening.
Thank you.